Being broke announces itself long before numbers enter the room, because pressure leaks through behavior in ways people don't consciously track, but instantly respond to. And that pressure comes from the constant internal calculation of cost, risk, and consequence that never turns off. So your timing tightens, your voice edits itself, your decisions carry hesitation, and all of that communicates something precise to the social environment, which is that your margin for error is thin. And thin margins trigger containment responses because groups are wired to maintain flow, not fairness. And when someone signals fragility, the system doesn't attack. It adjusts by narrowing options, simplifying plans, and reducing expectation. And this is where the experience of being broke starts to feel heavier than the math, because what you're actually feeling is the friction of being managed rather than met. And the more that pressure lives in your body, the more consistently it broadcasts. And consistency is what turns a momentary condition into a stable classification. Because once people sense that money creates strain around you, they instinctively reduce variables, and you become one of them. Not through judgment, but through pattern recognition. And that pressure you carry becomes the evidence used to justify treating you as someone whose range must stay limited, even when nothing explicit is said, and even when you never asked for anything at all. And that pressure almost always has a memory, because long before money became a number, it became an atmosphere. And if you grew up around silence, arguments, shame, or constant vigilance tied to finances, your nervous system learned that money equals instability, and instability equals danger. So safety became associated with not needing too much, not wanting too openly, and not creating financial ripples that could turn into conflict. And that lesson didn't form as a belief. It formed as a reflex, which means it survived adulthood untouched and now lives inside posture, pacing, and self-editing. And when a child learns that money stress changes the emotional weather of the room, they learn to shrink themselves preemptively to keep things calm. And that shrinking becomes identity, because identities are just strategies that worked long enough to feel permanent. And by the time you're an adult, that strategy is no longer protecting you from parents or chaos, but it's still running and still signaling to the outside world that expansion equals risk and containment equals safety. And people respond to that signal the same way your childhood environment did, by lowering expectations, narrowing scope, and keeping you inside familiar limits, which feels strangely normal because it's the same emotional logic you were trained in before you ever understood what money was supposed to do. And once that conditioning is in place, the nervous system takes over because its job is not accuracy, it's survival. And survival means avoiding states that previously led to overwhelm, conflict, or loss. So when money enters the environment, your body automatically scans for threat and shifts into conservation mode, where exposure feels dangerous and flexibility feels irresponsible. And this is why conversations about cost, timing, or future plans create a subtle tightening inside you, even when nothing bad is happening, because your system is preparing for impact, not opportunity. And that preparation changes how you move through space, how quickly you respond, and how much certainty you project. And those signals tell others that interacting with you requires care, buffering, or adjustment, which is metabolically expensive for a group. So the group unconsciously limits engagement and calls it efficiency. And over time, this loop teaches your nervous system that staying small reduces friction, while stepping forward increases social pressure. So the safest move becomes maintaining the broke posture even when the external conditions no longer justify it, because safety is defined by felt experience, not updated reality. And the system will always choose the familiar threat over the unfamiliar expansion, even if the unfamiliar expansion is objectively better. And as this survival logic stabilizes, it quietly turns into loyalty, because once an identity keeps you safe long enough, abandoning it feels like betrayal. And that's where the real conflict begins, since moving out of the broke position doesn't just threaten comfort, it threatens belonging. And when your role in a family or group has been the one who needs less, asks less, and doesn't destabilize the emotional economy, then earning more, wanting more, or occupying more space creates dissonance that feels interpersonal, not internal. And the nervous system interprets that dissonance as danger, because danger once meant loss of connection, so it generates resistance that looks like self-doubt, hesitation, or sudden loss of interest. And money dysmorphia distorts the final layer by freezing your self-image at a moment of scarcity. So no matter how circumstances shift, your internal model still treats resources as fragile, temporary, and easily lost, which makes confidence feel reckless and caution feel responsible. And together, these mechanisms create an invisible income ceiling that has nothing to do with skill or opportunity and everything to do with how your nervous system believes you're allowed to go before you threaten safety, belonging, or moral legitimacy. And that ceiling holds not because it's enforced externally, but because every internal signal aligns to keep you beneath it, while convincing you the limit is simply who you are. And as these mechanisms reinforce each other, the pattern doesn't stay static, it escalates, because every time you choose predictability over expansion, the system records confirmation that staying contained works. And that confirmation reshapes future perception, so opportunities start to feel misaligned before they're even evaluated, conversations feel exhausting before they begin, and any situation that might recalibrate how others see you triggers anticipatory tension that your body wants to avoid. And this avoidance compounds socially because people adapt to the version of you that shows up consistently, and consistency becomes reputation. So fewer doors are opened, fewer assumptions of capability are made, and fewer expectations are placed on you, which temporarily reduces pressure while permanently shrinking your operating range. And this is how the broke identity becomes self-sustaining, because the external world now mirrors the internal ceiling and feeds it back as reality, making it increasingly difficult to tell whether you're choosing smallness or responding to it. And the longer this loop runs, the natural it feels to explain it as personality, preference, or circumstance, rather than recognizing it as a closed system that protects equilibrium by quietly excluding momentum. And at some point, the tension sharpens because the numbers may change, but the position does not. And that mismatch creates a strange disorientation where you are no longer financially where you used to be, but you are still treated as if you are. And the discomfort of that gap forces a confrontation your system has been delaying, which is that escaping the broke identity requires more than earning more. It requires tolerating the instability that comes when people can no longer predict you, place you, or manage you. And that instability feels dangerous, precisely because your conditioning taught you that safety comes from being easy to account for. So the question you eventually collide with is not how to make more money, but whether you are willing to survive the social recalibration when the role you have always played stops being available and the system around you has not yet decided what to do with who you're becoming.